Chapter 2. Have you ever heard an old school country song? When the girl spoke, Hennessy's gaze was drawn to her face. She was rather pretty, in a tragic goth kind of way. In the dim light of the bar, her irises looked almost onyx. Not that he could see them all that well beneath the thick black bangs that curled over her forehead. The image of his first glimpse of them lingered in his mind, a constant reminder of how depthless and warm they were. His focus left her eyes and skimmed over the rest of her. Her raven black hair curled into a perfect bob around her too pale face. Combined with her grey and black clothes, she looked like she'd stepped straight out of a black and white photo. The mixture could have been creepy if she didn't pull it off so well. It all gave her the appearance of a porcelain doll rather than a horror movie villain. Not wanting to get caught staring, he dropped his attention back down to the ice pack he'd pressed against her knee. You know the ones I mean. My wife left me and my dog died, then my truck blew up with my wallet inside. She sang the fake lyrics in an overly emphasised country twang. I think I've heard one or two of them, Hennessy confirmed with a laugh, though it surprised him that she had. With her dark clothes, black hair and heavy boots, she didn't look like the sort of person who'd ever had cause to listen to a single country song, much less enough of them to know the general theme. Well, any of those would pretty much sum up the suckfest my day has been so far. The longer he was in the woman's presence, the less he was able to figure her out. She had an edge sharper than most people he knew, and everything about her pointed towards some deep, dark secret. Her smile and eyes told a different story. One of life, a freeness that wasn't shown anywhere else in her demeanour. He wondered at the mysteries her smile held. Lifting the ice pack off her knee again to check whether the swelling had gone down or not, he risked another glance up at those depthless eyes. Whatever riddles were hidden inside her mind would have to stay that way. It was impossible for him to delve into the depths of them. Not because he didn't want to, because it was against regulations. His father had made it clear what would happen if he was caught fraternising with a customer or supplier again. Make a couple of mistakes, screw one delivery girl in the storeroom and a customer behind the bar, and all of a sudden you're pegged as the bar playboy. Of course, his older brother Jameson could practically bring a new girl around every night. But that was fine because he had a respectable job in a law firm downtown. Never mind that Hennessy didn't have the opportunity to give up his job at the bar. If he dared to, he and his siblings would lose their last connection to their mother. He had tried once. He had left Cecilia's to do the college route, but left that life when his father's health had taken a downward turn. That was the first time Camille tried to sink her claws into the bar. The woman in black hissed as Hennessy shifted the ice pack again. His gaze lifted to absorb her features once more. Her slender nose, full lips and heart-shaped face. There was definitely something about this woman that held Hennessy captive, that drew him in and made him want to know more. Do you want to talk about it? He asked, indicating her knee. She scoffed and looked up at the ceiling. I wouldn't even know where to start. Well, how about a drink instead? Take away some of the pain. I don't know. I don't really drink too much. Not at all? The concept was unusual to him. Sure, he'd only been legally allowed to drink for around 3 years, but the alcohol had been somewhat free-flowing in his family's home for longer than that. At least around the dinner table and during the times his parents or grandparents were creating new cocktails. His family had always been inventing new twists on old recipes, and alcohol had been the language of love in their house throughout his entire childhood. His father had never brought home roses and chocolates, but rather rosé wines and chocolate liqueurs. The first time Hennessy had seen his father buy flowers at all was after Hennessy's mother passed away when he was only 10. No. The woman's gaze was focused on his hands as he pressed the ice pack against her knee. I've never really liked the taste of anything. He watched her mouth as he asked the question. Her lips were so full and pretty, so kissable. He pushed the thought out of his head before it could fester. I don't really have enough experience with it all to say everything. My boyfriend used to drink stuff that tasted like lighter fluid, and I've never had the chance to expand my tastes. Boyfriend. Damn. As soon as he'd had the thought, he tried to ignore the fact that he'd entertained any idea of being with her. No matter how kissable her lips might have been, this wasn't a hookup or a dating opportunity. You are over 21, aren't you? Her words had made him wonder. What would his dad say upon learning Hennessy was not only fantasising about a cute young goth, but that he'd allowed someone underage to stay in the bar? Of course I am. Her teeth sank into her bottom lip. Or at least I am now. I think I'm going to have to see some ID. He said the words in a teasing tone as a plan formed. Tending the bar gave him every right to ask to see something to prove she was old enough to be there. If that also gave him a glimpse at her name, well, that was just a bonus. She issued a long sigh that almost made him regret asking. Of course you would ask that. He put on a winning grin. Well, if you show me some ID, I'll get you a drink. On the house. He winked at her as he said the last sentence. I'd love to take you up on that offer, but I'm afraid I can't. And it all comes down to the shitty day I'm having. Before he could push on and ask about her day again, the sound of a throat clearing behind him made him leap away from her. The ice pack he'd held against her knee fell to the floor as he scrambled backward just in case the new arrival was his father or his wicked stepmother. Instead, it was Bailey, his older sister. She cast him a glare from where she stood beside the entrance to the back. She glanced between Hennessy and the goth guest before frowning. She nodded her blonde head toward the back, silently indicating she wanted a meeting. Her ponytail swished from side to side as she turned and sauntered away, her eyes watching the girl in black almost as keenly as Hennessy's had been. With a roll of his eyes, he followed his sister. When the barman disappeared into the back, Ariana adjusted the black wig she'd selected for the day. Her plan to kick the world's ass hadn't gone well at all, and she was ready to be herself again. She didn't want to walk around the streets of New York looking like she'd sculpted a woman though. How could a day go so wrong? She should have known from the outset that her day was going to be a clusterfuck. She would have been better hiding under the blanket from the moment she received Curtis's text. After that, it just got worse. Losing her purse on the subway on the way to the Modern Art Museum, arriving at the studio after her trip uptown, just in time for her creepy professor to make his rounds. His wandering hands as he told her things she didn't want to hear. I had hoped to see more of you this semester, Miss West. On the canvas, of course. Discovering that Bella had not only moved out of the apartment, but had left college and was already back on her way home, wherever the hell that was. It meant Ariana had to say goodbye to the $500 loan to her former roommate. 2 hours on the phone cancelling credit cards that were already maxed out. It had all been topped off by a businessman who, in his rush to get past her and into a taxi, had elbowed her tit and shoved her aside. That push had sent her tripping down a handful of stairs and smashing into a black metal door at the bottom. The impact was hard enough to rattle her teeth and injure her knee. Not one single person from the street had tried to help her to her feet. She'd thought her day was looking up when the door she'd fallen against opened to reveal a man who not only took her breath away, but was kind too. With one look at her knee, he'd agreed to let her in early and then helped her with some ice. His hair was shaved, but hinted at a light colour. The depths of his sapphire eyes sparkled as he met her gaze. Beneath his crisp black business shirt, his muscles twisted in almost sinful ways as he held her in his arms for the brief moments after she'd fallen against him. The time he'd spent knelt in front of her was enough for her to study him. Lean but muscled, tall but not towering. His shoulders were broad, but his waist tapered inward. He either worked out or was extremely blessed naturally. While they'd been alone, she'd found it almost impossible to avoid getting lost in his eyes whenever they were turned on her. She could have swum in the deep pools of his irises for days without needing to come up for air. It wasn't just his physique or his eyes either. His hands. Oh God, his hands were works of art, all on their own, as though sculpted by the gods themselves out of the most malleable clay. Each of his long fingers was tipped by a manicured nail. Moved by a force she didn't fully understand, Ariana reached for a small pile of napkins and found a pen. With those crude tools, Ariana sketched out the shape of the barman's impeccable fingers as best as she could, tracing each line carefully. While the pen rolled over the paper, she tried to imagine the way his fingers would stretch and curl. She wasn't a sketch artist though, and couldn't depict the realism needed to capture what she needed to. She didn't do reality, only abstract. Her lack of skill frustrated her more with each failed attempt. Her mind had wandered to a place where his hands replaced her professor's. Her rescuer massaging her shoulders would have been more than pleasant. Without the ball and chain of her relationship with Curtis, she was ready to pursue some fun with a local boy. Mr. Hottie McBartender could have been the perfect start. As she failed again, she thought about corporate Barbie, the woman who had come through the door and ruined the fantasies Ariana had been getting lost in. With nothing more than a nod, the blonde bombshell had beckoned Mr. Hot Stuff into the bat. Ariana was pretty enough, but not make men come running with a single nod attractive. Ariana shook herself out of her growing funk. What did it matter if this guy had a girlfriend? Sure, it meant he was off the menu, but he was being nice to her on the shittiest day of her life so far. She could use the space to hide from the world until her knee stopped throbbing. Out of frustration, she screwed up the napkin, shoved it in her backpack and tried again. This time, the image took on a different shape. What's Miss My Chemical Romance doing here? Bailey's voice was sharp as she spoke to Hennessy like a child. Don't tell me you brought her here for a pre-opening bang. Hennessy resisted the urge to roll his eyes again. Yeah, and the rest of the emo gangbangers are going to be here any minute, so if we're done... Ness! Bailey's voice held warning as she issued his nickname. You know Dad will flip if he sees you canoodling with some goth freak in the bar. Especially after Bridget. There's no need to bring up Bridget, he snapped. It was typical of Bailey to try to mother him. She'd been doing that ever since their mother died. Sometimes he really hated being the baby of the family. That girl out there, she's no one. Just someone who tripped down the stairs into our bar on what is apparently the worst day of her life. Sue me for not kicking her onto the street when she needed to ice her knee. Why did his sister have to come along when she did? He'd been having a good time alone with the woman in black. He was anxious to get back out to talk to her again before everyone else arrived for their shifts. Maybe he wasn't able to fraternise with her, but that didn't mean he couldn't find out a little bit more about her, or to ask her to stay for the night so he could try to unearth a few more secrets. He stuck his head around the doorframe to check on the injured woman. Although he told himself it was to ensure she was okay and no one else had come in, a big part of him just wanted to see her again. Sitting alone where he'd left her at the bar, only a few feet away, the woman in black was keenly focused on something in front of her. He didn't think she could overhear their conversation, but just in case he lowered his voice. What are you doing here anyway? Didn't you have some big corporate function you were hosting tonight? Yeah, I just dropped in to grab the extra cartons of booze Dad added to last week's order for me. Of course, I didn't expect to walk in on a private session with you on the floor practically salivating over a customer while the bar is closed. Again, I wasn't salivating over anyone. I swear, I was just helping her out. I watched you for a few minutes before you saw me. And you, my dear brother, were salivating. You're lucky it was me and not Dad who saw the two of you. Bales, leave it. I'm a big boy. A big boy who likes to bring the pretty girls down here while it's quiet for a touch of the old Hennessy Ross charm. It's not like that. She gave him the bitch brow that she had long ago made an art form. It's really not, he insisted. I'm just watching out for you. I appreciate it, but you need to get moving or you're going to be late. Okay, Bailey said with a laugh as she loaded up the crates onto a small hand truck. I get it, and I'll leave you to play Casanova, but just be careful. You know Cruella has been on the warpath lately. She'd welcome any excuse to get between you and Dad or sink her claws into this place. Noted. He didn't throw it back at his sister that for the last 6 months he'd been the one playing defence against Camille, or that he'd sent her packing just hours earlier. "See you around, nurse. Love you," she called back as she headed for the service elevator. After he'd taken a deep breath to get his sister's words out of his head, Hennessy headed back out to check on the woman in black. Only she was gone. He tried to ignore the pang of disappointment over his inability to discover her name. Instead, he went about setting everything up for the night ahead. He had about an hour before the other bartenders would be in, and then the rush would begin. Whether it was Monday or Friday didn't make a huge difference to the bar. The clientele were fairly consistent the whole week. The kitchen staff added to the local patronage with their good old-fashioned home cooking, which complemented the range of custom cocktails served at the bar. While Hennessy was giving the bar a final wipe down, he found a pen and napkin tucked away under the bar mat near where the mysterious girl had sat. Had she left him her phone number? With brewing excitement, he pulled out the napkin and unfolded it, hoping to see the digits that would lead him back to her. Instead, he found a perfectly sketched hand extending its middle finger to the world. To him, scrunching up the napkin, he looked toward the door where the woman had fallen into his life before fleeing it again. "Message received," he thought. "Loud and clear."